somebody else here. Oh, we have a visitor today. Come on in. Make yourself at home. Rachel, right? Okay. All right. We're on page 295, talking about moral development. How did you learn to be a moral person? Who taught you to be a moral person? Your parents? Your parents? Your parents? Your parents? Your parents? Did you all have parents that taught you to be a moral person? Then after your parents got through working on you, did you have anybody else who worked on you to help you become a moral person?
Your teachers.
Teachers? Were any of you more open to being taught to be a moral person by your parents and less inclined to be taught to be a moral person by your teachers? Or were you more inclined to listen to what your teacher said and less inclined to listen to your parents? I think a lot of that has to do with our personality. When our daughters were adolescents, do you remember adolescence, or are you going through it now? Where your parents just have trouble realizing that you're almost a young adult and they're not letting you grow up very much. And sometimes, and this is a kind of a dilemma, you get to the place to where you start thinking, is all the values I embrace just I picked them up from my parents, or are they my own values? And sometimes when you talk to other adults, those other adults help you solidify those values and kind of take ownership of them. And I used to go to the people at school where our children went to Christian school and to the youth pastor and say, I just want to thank you for helping my daughters sort things out in life, because they're more open during their adolescent years to you helping them sort it out than they are to me. And it's not like it's not they don't like me, they like other people better. It's just that if they take it from me, then it's just a family thing. But if they take it from somebody else, then it's kind of a choice they've made, and they start to internalize those values. And just recognize that's part of what's going on. But since we're talking about 3 to 6 year olds, let's see. Do you ever remember something your teachers taught you when you were 3 to 6 year olds that maybe you didn't learn at home? Or did you learn something at home that when you got to school, you were shocked that everybody else did something differently? Anyone remember being shocked by the first time you saw somebody after lunch throwing some of their food in the trash can? Were any of you raised in a home where there are people in poor parts of the world who are starving to death? No one was ever told that? And therefore you should do what? Box your food up and ship it over to those poor people. No, you should do what? Clean your plate. Eat all of your food. Eat everything that's on your plate, because we don't want to waste it. And I don't know how not wasting it connects with poor people around the world, but I didn't question it, because I found in my house, got you, Zip. I found in my house that if you question the moral instruction of your parents, you got in trouble. So I just didn't question it. I just said, okay. I said why a few times and got in enough trouble where I said, I'm not going to say that anymore. That just is not a good strategy. So what happens when you have a little child in the 3 to 6 year bracket who isn't getting any help from those around him to learn to be a moral person? Well, the bottom of page 295 talks about something called your conscience. And isn't that a beautiful thing that God has already sent us into the world with a certain moral yardstick? I used to do experiments with my little girls to see how much of a moral barometer God had put in them, that when they did something that was wrong, I would talk to them about, when you were doing that, what were you thinking? What was going through your head? And sometimes they didn't want to have those conversations because I was appealing to their conscience. And I have to tell you, the more I talk to little kids about the built-in moral standard that God has given them, the more I come away saying God has planted in the heart of man, not only made us social creatures and not only created us with a need to have a relationship with Him, but He's created us with some moral standards that I think we as adults and as parents ought to reinforce those standards in our children's lives, and not simply say, oh, that doesn't matter. I mean, if a little kid feels guilty about something, then even if our culture changes what it says about it, let's not let them off the hook. Let's let God's conscience do its work in the little kid's life. Okay? Let's move on to page 297, or 298, where he talks about. Uriah?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. 298, where he talks about Kohlberg and his levels or stage of moral reasoning. The stages on page 297 are punishment and obedience. And one of the criticisms of Kohlberg is that he kind of makes it sound like, I'm not sure he completely believes this, but the people who criticize him say his theory makes it sound like that you start out here, little kids start out with punishment and obedience, then they move on up to these higher stages where stage 5, where they're basically fitting into society. They value the rules because the society embraces those rules, and that's where most people stay, is at stage 5. And stage 6, some of the guys I've heard talk about this at the university, and from a secular standpoint, they say the only people who ever reached stage 6 universal ethical principles were people like Jesus and Gandhi. And I don't know why they put Gandhi up there with Jesus, because okay, there's just doesn't make sense to me. But when the guys at the university talked about these universal principles and discussed them, what I discovered was that if you're a believer in Jesus Christ and you've invited Christ to be the Lord of your life, and if you're embracing the mind of Christ and Christ-like thinking, guess what happens? As your life starts to reflect the life of Christ, you're actually tasting or experiencing this universal ethical principle thing. So really, we Christians have a lot of universal ethical principles because we get them right out of the Bible. And when you embrace those, you're living at stage 6. But let's just take one of God's principles of living. Have any of you read this in Romans? Submit to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. So what ordinance did I encounter this morning on my way to school? Now today it wasn't a problem because the roads might have been slick, so I was driving a little slower. The speed limit, and because it says 35. And that helps because they just changed it to 35 after they widened the road. It used to be 25. Can you imagine driving through the country on a road that's got fields on both sides where the sign says 25? Now, does that make sense to you? No, okay? See, now understand, part of my moral upbringing, did any of you have parents who would give you a moral axiom and then say, doesn't that make sense? Doesn't that make sense? And well, my parents did. So understand, when I discuss morality, part of my background is that I'm going to say, does that make sense to you? So I see that 25-mile-an-hour sign and I go, that doesn't make sense out here in the country. Why would they want us to drive 25? There's no little children on both sides of the roads that we could run into. What's the problem here? Now, you understand? What I'm doing is I'm questioning the morality of the speed limit people. Well, then maybe if it doesn't make sense, I just won't obey that rule. No, I embrace a higher moral principle. Submit to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. Okay, I would wish that were always the driving principle in my life, but sometimes the reason I stay under that number is because stage 1 on page 297, what? I stay under that limit because I don't want to be punished by the policeman who's waiting there to give away tickets. So, you understand, this stage 1 thing stays with us for all of life. But hopefully, a lot of what we do it because we're operating up here at stage 6, where we're embracing universal ethical principles. And understand, if you go to grad school at a secular university, you'll hear a lot of people telling you that nobody reaches that level. You just that's beyond our capacity. And as I heard them give that lecture at the university, I thought they're right. It is beyond our capacity, because is this fair to say? You couldn't live a Christ-like life if you didn't have Christ living in you and the Holy Spirit empowering you to live that way. You could not just read the Gospels and learn about Jesus without being a believer and replicate his moral standards. You don't have that capacity. And of course, one guy at the university, when he found out I was a Christian, he said, so why are you a Christian? Because your parents were Christians? And I said, no, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. Well, he said, well, tell me about that. And he said, how did you become a Christian? Well, here's this guy with a couple of PhDs saying, how did you become a Christian? I said, well, I thought, I'm going to tell him. I mean, I can't, the Bible says, one of God's universal principles, don't lie. I just said, well, I asked Jesus to come into my life and save me, and he did when I was 18 years old, and I was born again. I became a brand new creature in Christ. And he goes, so are you telling me that Jesus lives in you? Now, how would you answer that question? What would you have to say?
Not physically.
Christ in me, my hope of glory? What would I end up saying? Does Christ live in me? Does Christ live in you?
Yes, as a spirit, not as a physical person.
Well, no, the physical person was put on a cross, put in a grave, and did what? Walked out of that grave and went right back to heaven, being the person he was before he came to earth and took on a human body. See, and that brings up another dilemma, and I'm sure some of those people would think, how could that be? But see, it's like spiritually, but watch this. Have any of you ever been taught this stuff about spirituality, that you're a person with a soul, when in fact what we really are is we're an eternal soul with a body? You follow me? We're going to live forever, and we're going to have a resurrected body, and it's going to be a spiritual body, not a material body. But do you understand what I'm saying? We're not primarily a physical being with some little appendage called a soul. We're a spiritual being. We're a soulish being that happens to be confined to a body today, living in a body. So when you think about this stages of morality, just realize that we all operate at various times in our life at the various stages. Stage 2, where I'll serve some of your interest if you serve some of mine. Stage 3, I'm going to simply be a good person. Stage 4, This is the society we live in. These are the morals that everybody accepts. And see, I have to tell you that I love the fact that I can say to some little kids, I mean, take the Bible out of the moral picture and see what happens. So this little kid says, so why is it wrong for me to steal stuff from my classmates? Well, because it would make your classmate feel bad. Well, too bad for him. His loss is my gain. I mean, don't we all know that little adage? Finders, keepers, what? Losers, weepers. I mean, see, we've been taught that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, but your parents would want you not to do that. Well, okay, but they're not here. You understand that you're trying to talk the kid into being a moral person with just using the stuff in our culture. And then when I say, well, you know what God says about it? The creator of the universe? They go, what does he say? In fact, I was dealing with a little kid in a Christian school one time, and he was stealing stuff. And so I opened the Bible up, and I said, read this verse in the Bible. And he said, thou shalt steal. And I go, what? And I said, read it again. He said, thou shalt steal. And so I took my pencil out, and I go, okay, I'm going to put my pencil on the words, and you read them. And he goes, thou shalt not, he says, steal. And he looked at me and said, Mr. Bonine, I never saw that not in there before. Now, do you understand what had happened? And when that happened, a little light came on in my head. It went ding. The God of this world has done what? Blinded the minds of those who don't believe. And the God of this world, Satan, had blinded his mind to seeing directly what God had said to do, and he had left the operative word out. So he thought it was okay to steal. Now, he was violating his conscience, but he had hardened his conscience over time. You follow what's going on? And he didn't care what other people thought. But once he saw clearly that this is what God expected, it revolutionized his life. Now, granted, some people develop some what from God's perspective would be immoral habits in life. And I say, okay, here, let's see what God says about it. And I've learned now to have them read it out loud. So, because if you tell little children this is what God says about it, they'll say, well, that's what you say. But if you show them in the Word of God, this is what God says about it. That's why you want to teach little kids how to read. So when you show them in the Word of God what God says about it, then it becomes a life-changing kind of situation. Because now it's God speaking and not just my parents or my teachers or somebody else saying something about it. Okay, let's move on to page 298, where it talks about parenting. And what does it say at the bottom of page 298 about parenting? It talks about the dimensions of parenting, parental warmth, and parental control. Now, which do you think is more important? Parental warmth or parental control? Both. It's kind of like that nature-nurture thing. Which is more of what's going on in my growth and development? Nature or nurture? And what's going on here is, if you want to be a biblical parent, you're going to have both warmth and control. What happens if you have warmth without control? Well, won't the child just figure it out on their own and pick it up and be a good person like I am if I'm a good role model and I'm their buddy? No, there have to be those controls. What happens if you have control without warmth? Then you look like the policeman driving the car with a uniform who has a job to give tickets to people who go too fast. So you want to have both. So what do you start out with when the little baby comes home from the hospital? What did we learn in the last chapters about those 0 to 2? What do little kids need from their caregivers?
Warmth. The care.
Holding them, touching them, connecting with them. Warmth, warmth, warmth. And the more warmth you develop with the child that you're working with, the easier it will be to control. And if you're having trouble controlling a little kid, either as a teacher or just as a caregiver, then I would suggest that you need to spend some time developing a warmer relationship with that person. And the warmer the relationship, the easier it will be to maintain control. Now, we're all going to have control struggles. Why is that?
Because we have sin nature.
Because we have a sin nature. So that's just going to be a part of the equation. One time when my daughters had a meeting and said, Dad, we need to talk to you about, we've concluded that you're way too strict. None of our friends have parents as strict as you are. I said, oh, okay, let's talk about it. And I said, so what? Would you like to go to live at their house instead of here? And they go, well, we can't do that. But I said, but if you could, you would, huh? Well, I don't know if I'd go that far with it. I just wish you wouldn't be so strict. I said, and you know, sometimes I wish I wasn't that strict too. But you have to understand something. Your mother didn't get saved till she was 13 years old. I didn't get saved till I was 18 years old. You understand when we say we're trying to spare our kids a lot of grief? I said, you girls are welcome to pray for me that if I'm being too strict, God will soften me up a little bit. And then they rolled their eyes. Now, what does that mean, girls, when you roll your eyes at your father? Like, yeah, will that ever happen? Is that what that means? That's what it meant in my house. I said, so then I said, okay, girls, if this is that big a deal to you, you ask God to change me, and if I'm not willing to change, then ask God to give you a new father. Just snap me out of here and send a new father to live at your house and raise you. Now, you understand what's going on in my head? Tom, you better make sure that you're being sensitive to God in how you're parenting. But then the girl said, Dad, you're not that bad. I said, oh, that's comforting to hear. But you still pray for me that God will make me the kind of parent that God wants you to have. One time I had a little guy in school who was complaining to me about his parents being so strict, and his friends' parents weren't near as strict with him. And he said, why is that, Mr. Bonai? I said, oh, that's an easy one. He said, it is? And I said, yeah. I said, if your friends' parents had you for a child, they would be more strict with you too. You just have some real problems. I mean, he did. And I said it in love, but I was just being honest with him. He needed some work done in his life, and that's why God gave him the parents he had given him. And he probably, if he would just buckle down and submit to God and learn what God wanted him to learn, life would get a lot better. I don't know if any of you have ever done this, but I used to encourage young people to do experiments. To take Ephesians 6, 1 and 2, God's first commandment to children with a promise, obey your parents, honor your father and mother. I used to encourage them to, on vacations from school, deliberately 2 or 3 times a day, go up to their parents and say, what can I do to please you? And whatever they said, you do it right away. And anytime they tell you to do anything, you obey the first time without it being repeated. And do that for like a week or so and see what happens. And invariably, every time, the parents started to lighten up a little bit because they said, wow, you're really starting to become a responsible young person. You follow? The more a child demonstrates what we would call spiritual maturity, the less the parents have to control them. On page 299 or page 300, it talks about different kinds of parents. authoritative parents, warm and controlling, authoritarian parents, a lot of control with not very much warmth, and permissive parents, a lot of warmth but very little control. And which one would you recommend as the best approach to parenting? Warmth with controls. Now, what if you didn't grow up with warmth? Then it's going to be a little awkward being warm, but hey, deal with it. Get over it. I think one of the things God did to help me learn this lesson about being a warm, caring parent is He gave me 2 daughters. And I don't know why, but those daughters just needed hugs. They would come home from school and have a bad day, and I'd say, and see, my approach is, what can I do to fix it? I don't think you could, Dad. I'm going, well, if I can't fix it, come here and I'll give you a big hug. And I would squeeze them till I'd hear their back pop. Any of your dads ever do that? And guess what they would say? Here's what they would say. Well, I feel a lot better now, Dad. That helps. And I never could figure out how that helped, but I just knew from what I read about being a warm, loving parent that that's what they needed. And if it helped them think better about their day, then so be it. I just had to learn to do that. Well, guess what happened when these daughters grew up, got married, and gave me 4 grandsons. I mean, I came from a family where there were 3 boys before any girls came along, and by the time the girls came along, us boys were pretty much into our teenage years. And I go, well, I wonder if this warmth stuff is just as valuable to little boys as it is to little girls. So I just started being warm with my grandsons. Now, you understand how awkward that was for me? Because that wasn't the way it was at the house where I grew up. And to this day, my grandsons are now, the oldest ones are in college or graduating from college this year. And when I see them, I say, how's it going, bud? And they go, it's going great, Grandpa, or Poppy. They all call me Poppy. And so then I said, I haven't seen you for a long time. So what do I say? Can I have a big hug? Do any of you as grown young men give big hugs to your parents or grandparents? Adam does. Quade does. Yeah? Not. Get that right. Quiz does. Okay, I'm just telling you that you guys have a heritage going for you that will be easy for you to pass on to the next generation. But if you weren't raised with this warmth, with control stuff, then just say, I'm going to break out of whatever box I was raised in and help the next generation of children that I care for, not only my own birth children, but the children I work with in church and in school, and help them become the people that God wants them to be. They have to see that modeled by the people around them. And I don't even want to talk about page 301, these rejecting and neglecting parents. That just, every time I read reports about rejecting and neglecting parents, it just breaks my heart. At a class at the university where I took a course on kids with special needs, and I was amazed at how often they talked about rejecting and neglecting parents. And I was just shocked, and the teacher looked at me, and I was taking this class after I had my PhD, so the teacher was a bit humored that a guy with a doctor's degree was back taking this course, but I wanted to learn more about children with special needs, and so she said, well, it looks like the good doctor is a bit shocked by all this. And I just said to my instructor, I said, you want to know something? The animals on our farm took better care of their young than some of these people you're describing to me. Is that pretty sad? That God has programmed animals to take better care of their offspring than some adults do. And often those adults are people whose lives are all messed up in all kinds of ways, and they have children and just really mess those kids up. Fortunately, when those children encounter somebody who's warm and caring and loving and gives them loving discipline, they respond and can grow up to be wonderful adults who don't do that next thing to the next generation. But page 302 does talk about something that we need to discuss, and that's, well, look what the book says on page 302. Spare the rod and spare the child. Were any of you taught something different? Spare the rod and what? Spoil the child? That's what I was taught too. When I was at the university studying this stuff, everybody said the same thing. Paddling is just adults beating on children for no good reason. And it doesn't do anything but cause problems. I think I told you about the guy that went to Leavenworth, to the prison, and did some research. He wrote it in one of his textbooks. It's not the one I'm using in this class, but it was a textbook I read one time, and he said, I asked all the people at the prison that if you were paddled as a child, raise your hand. And what they do, they raise their hands. So what does he conclude? That people who are paddled end up going to prison. Now, how many of you were paddled as a child? Oh, well, look at that. Paddling will result in you going to college. I mean, see, it's obvious that the guy isn't doing real research. He's just trying to prove a point. And every time I heard that stuff, I actually wrote on a piece of paper. One of my research techniques is to write on a question on a piece of paper and then go through the Bible to see what God says about it. And so I wrote on a piece of paper, what is God's alternative to paddling? And then read clear through the Bible and wrote down everything I found. And the verse that I had on my notes that stood out the most is, a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. Now, these people would say, you can discipline without paddling. And I said, that's true, you can. But the Bible says, a rod and reproof gives wisdom. A rod of correction drives what from the heart of a child? Foolishness. So in my mind, when a child is being foolish, and when I'm wanting to instill wisdom, those would be occasions when I would use paddling. And Dr. Dobson, in his book, I think it's called Dare to Discipline, as a medical doctor, he talks about the medical side of paddling. And here's what he says. He says that God has built children with a whole bunch of sensitive nerve endings in the two padded backsides, which is where we often use paddles. And he said, and when a stinging sensation hits that part of the body, the child registers, whatever caused this, don't do it again. And I didn't have to paddle my girls a lot. It doesn't take much. I mean, if you say, I'll use a paddle for everything, that's overkill. That's not what the Bible talks about doing. And that's probably what these secular guys are reacting to. But when I used it the way God intended it to be used, and couched it in prayer and in what God said about it, I still remember one of my daughters said, when she was little, she goes, Dad, I promise, I won't do it anymore. I won't do it anymore. I said, and you know what? I know you mean that, but I know you'll forget unless you have something happen that causes you to remember for a long time. And a stinging sensation on the backside of your body will make a lasting impression. Yes?
I think it's really important to note that the children should know what they've done wrong.
Yes.
Really understand that.
That's right. That they understand, and they understand why we're doing it. And we love them before we do it, and we love them again after we do it. And guess what? A little child doesn't want to be loved after you do it either. They just want to go off and have a pity party. But it's just like that you all these parameters around there in terms of, and again, it's just like ask God for wisdom as to when and how to use this. But if I want my children to grow up to be wise and to avoid doing foolish things, I'm probably going to have to use a paddle sometime in life. Now, in our society today, as a teacher, you can't do that. And people say, well, there you go. We're just going to have a bunch of foolish children in our hands who don't acquire wisdom. No, most of them still have parents who believe that paddling does make a difference. So when I have a problem that's just recurring, a child being foolish and not learning to make wise choices, I just call the parents as a caregiver and say, can you help me? Here's what's going on, and here's what I need help with. Would you talk to your child about it? I'll do more than talk to him about it. I'll tell him if he doesn't straighten up, he's going to get some swats next time you call. I said, well, I didn't call to get him in trouble. I'm just looking for help. He said, well, I'll help you. Do you think that behavior changes once Dad says, if I get another phone call from Mr. Bonine, we're going to the woodshed, boy? And I know a lot of people in our society say, that's just totally wrong. And here's my theory about the information I get from the Bible that culture decides, that our society decides is wrong. That culture's wrong and God is right. And God gave me that information so that I could avoid the pitfalls of man-made culture that wants to mislead me. In other words, I have a friend who just can't believe, I believe that God created the world in 6 days. And he went to a Christian college. But every time I see him, he says, so do you still believe in 6 days of creation? And I said, it's in the Bible. I can't help but believe it. He said, well, what do you do about the scientific evidence? And I said, if a scientist says one thing, no matter how smart he is, and God says something that differs, I go with God. Because I figure God knows more than any scientist on the earth. And he goes, well, that's ridiculous. And then I said to him one time, and he asked us every time we would get together, and I said to him one time, God could have saved us a lot of grief in terms of our relationship and friendship if he wouldn't have put in Genesis how he did it. But if he hadn't have put that there, where would we all be today? You understand? He put it there because he had a reason. He knew all of time. He had a reason for putting it there. And if he puts it there, then what is that we say? God said it. I believe it. And that settles it. Because God put that there for a reason. Just like when I'm working with children. I was working with this young guy one time, and we were talking about this thing in Ephesians 6:1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord. If you have a Bible with you and you look up Ephesians 6:1, see if there's a cross-reference to a passage in Colossians. If you have a cross-reference Bible, it's cool to do this. And this little kid said, and I said, children, obey your parents. And he said, Mr. Bonine, the Bible does not say obey your parents in all things. And that's exactly what he said. The Bible does not say obey your parents all the time in all things. And I said, it doesn't? He said, no. It says right here, obey your parents. And that's what it says in Ephesians 6:1 and 2. But I said, look at your Bible. See those little letters in there? Is there a letter pointing to a verse in Colossians? And he says, yeah. I said, okay, turn over to Colossians and read what God says in Colossians. Anyone know what God says in Colossians? Children, obey your parents in all things. Now, why do you think God put the Colossians passage in the Bible? Because he knew there would be little chippers out here like this guy who would try to talk themselves out of doing it all the time in Ephesians, so he put it someplace else to keep us from making that mistake, to being selective about when we obey our parents. You follow what I'm talking about? So if the Bible says that a rod and reproof giveth wisdom, now I heard a Christian one time talking about this, who was also a college professor, bless her heart, and we were at a camp speaking, and I was teaching what the Bible says about it, and she was doing seminars, and someone said, well, she doesn't believe that you should paddle children. And I said, well, did you ask her what she does with those verses? And he said, no. And I said, well, I will. So we sat down to eat one time, and I said, so what do you do with those verses? And she said, well, it all depends on how you interpret the word a rod and reproof giveth wisdom. A rod could be time out. Now, I think time out's a good idea, but a time out is not a rod. You follow me? She had just simply redefined the word. I mean, if you want to know what rod means in the Bible, get your Bible, do a word study, and you'll find out what it means. And the closest thing I ever saw to what the Bible talks about as a rod was when, did any of you ever have grandparents who did this, where they would go to a tree and cut off a switch? My dad had a big paddle that he had made out of a 1x6 that he used when he was a school teacher. So he kept it on display at our house to let us know that he wasn't above using that on his own children. So that's what I knew as a paddle. My grandmother didn't have one of those. She would just go to a tree and cut off a switch. Have you ever had somebody take a little branch off of a switch and smack you with it? It stings like you wouldn't believe. It does the same thing that Dobson talks about. It sends a message through the nervous system that says, don't do this again. So obviously, the textbook and I differ on that. But the one thing we do agree on is, yes, there are occasions when we need to paddle somebody. And isn't that interesting? The picture they show on page 304 is not somebody necessarily doing it the right way, so they can discredit it. But on page 305 and 306, there's some information that you need to have. And here's what I would say. Before you grab that paddle, ask yourself these questions on page 305 and page 306. Number one, were you managing the situation? And if you're not managing the situation, then it's your fault. You go, what are you talking about? Okay, we have a family reunion, and what happens at family get-togethers? The adults like to sit and chit-chat and let all the little kids go outside and play by themselves. And then pretty soon, two little kids come running in crying, saying what the other one did to them to make them cry. And some parent jumps up and says, do you have a paddle around here? And they take the kid out and say, you're going to get a paddling for that. And I'm going, wait a minute. Was anybody out there managing the situation? And because they weren't, Karis, guess what I do at family get-togethers? When people say, where's Tom? My wife will say, he's probably outside hanging out with the kids. And that's where I am, because I like children. But I'm practicing the first principle of positive discipline. I'm out managing the situation. And before something starts to happen, the kids are playing basketball. And all of a sudden, somebody gets a little aggressive and pushes somebody, and the other one takes the basketball and throws it at the first one. I go, whoa, wait a minute, time out, guys. They go, what, Poppy? I'm going, it's time to quit playing basketball and play something else. Playing basketball is getting out of hand. Give me the basketball, go get a kickball, go get a soccer ball, go get a football, play something else. They're playing with the football, and pretty soon things get out of hand. I say, whoa, wait a minute. Give me the football, let's play something else. If you can't learn to play together and be nice to each other, pretty soon you won't have any more balls left to play with out here. You understand? Now, if I wasn't out there managing the situation, what would happen? two little grandsons would be running into the house telling their parents what happened, and somebody would probably get a spanking. You follow what I'm talking about? So the first thing is, before you start paddling, were you managing the situation? What's the second thing on page 306? Set clear rules and limits. Was it just what you were... Rachel, just what you were saying, that make sure they understand what the rules and the limits are. That they know what they did was wrong. So do I have clear rules and limits? Is it clearly understood what goes on here? Yes?
Also, if they didn't know that what they did was wrong when they were doing it, probably shouldn't punish them for that.
Because that's my fault for not teaching them how wrong that was before they did it. That's kind of part of managing the situation. It's like, why do we have to quit playing basketball, Bobby? Because you're getting upset. I can see it in your faces. And instead of having fun with each other, it's turning into a fight. And that's not healthy. So we need to make sure people clearly understand. We need to teach them what's right and wrong before we just grab a paddle. So we have clear rules and clear limits. So they all understand. We communicate clearly what kind of behavior we want. And I'll just tell you, you can probably tell by the way I'm talking, I don't like to see children fussing with each other. I don't think God intended for them to play that way and get mean about it. He wanted them to be kind to each other. But they have a sin nature, so I'm going to watch for that. And when it starts to pop out, I'm going to stop it and say, let's do something else. And my daughters, I couldn't believe it. They had so many toys from grandparents and other people that I thought, how could you fight over toys when you have that many toys? But they would do it. And it's like, okay, so I don't want you fighting over these toys. It's like, what toy are you fighting over? And they would bring it to me. And I took this principle from the Old Testament. Remember the two ladies fighting over the baby? The king was going to just cut the baby in half and give them each half of it. Well, I go a little further than that. When my children were little kids and they would fuss over a toy, I would say, let me see what toy it is you're fussing over. Let me see why this thing is so important. And they would give it to me, and I would put it in a trash can and stomp on it and crush it. I said, there. We won't fight over that anymore, will we? And the first time I did that, my wife goes, Tom, you could have put it in the top of the closet or something. I said, yeah. And they'd walk around thinking, someday we're going to get that back. Now that toy is gone. It's not useful anymore. That's what Dad does when you fuss over stuff, girls. And they would go to Mom and say, Mom, you know what Dad did? And she goes, girls, you know Daddy doesn't like to see his girls fussing about stuff. Don't fuss about things. And they kind of learned to settle their differences before it got to me stomping on another toy and shattering it to pieces. I even went so far one time. My girls, do you girls know clearly you don't park your bicycle behind the car in the driveway? Were you told not to do that? Well, did you ever leave your bicycle parked behind the car? Well, what happened? Well, this father backed over the bicycle. I didn't drive clear over it. I just backed into it. That's when we had metal bumpers on cars. And I just bent part of it a little bit. And then pulled it out of the way and went on to work. And the next day told my daughter that your bicycle was in the driveway. I'm leaving to go to work. I backed over it and bent it. So you probably can't ride it till we get it fixed. It made a lasting impression. She never left her bicycle behind the car again. Now, it wasn't like that was the first time it happened. It had happened again and again and again. And that's where you just say, hey, I've got clear rules and clear limits, and I'm going to have some painful consequences that are painful before I have to start paddling. In other words, if pain makes a lasting impression, as Dobson says in Dare to Discipline, then maybe I can use this painful thing where the natural consequences of behavior have some painful consequences to keep them from doing something that I don't want them doing. And it's clear that I've set limits and I've made some rules. And then the third thing is to praise good behavior. When I'm out there watching kids play and they're playing and something happens, like one guy says, "You fouled me." And I'm going, "Wait a minute, guys, wait a minute. There's no referee here, so how about this? If you really foul somebody," basketball players, could you do this? Could you play a basketball game without referees? If the players all agreed before the game, if I foul you, I will say, I'll put my hand up and say, "I fouled, you get a free shot." Could we actually do that in a basketball game? Could we play basketball that way? Or are we so bent toward winning and getting away with something that we couldn't admit that we made a mistake and fouled somebody? I'm thinking, yeah, just say, "I fouled you, so you get a free throw." You follow the rationale? And when they would say, "Hey, I fouled you, you can take it out," and I would praise them for that. And so when you see people doing the right thing, you praise them. You praise them for doing good things. You simply say, "That makes me so happy to watch you guys playing together like this and being so kind to each other." And I think the more you praise good behavior, the book talks about catching them being good. The more you praise good behavior, and I wouldn't say "you're a good boy" or "you're a good girl." I would compliment them for what they had just done. I would praise them for what they were doing that was commendable. And you say, "You have a Bible verse for that?" Give honor to whom honor is due. And I think little children who are playing kindly with one another deserve some honor. And the way I give them that honor is I praise them for doing the right thing. And number 4, use explanations and reasoning. When misbehavior occurs, parents need to explain the rules and provide good reasons for compliance. There's a reason for my telling you to stay out of the street. If your ball rolls out in the street, don't go get it. Come and get me, and I'll go get it. I don't want you running out into the street. What's the reason for that? There might be some person driving down the street, doesn't see you, and they run over you. By the way, there's a reason for a little kid holding on to my finger, a 3 to 6 year old holding on to my finger when we're walking to the parking lot from the store. Why? The car can see me, but they can't see the little kid. And a little kid who runs ahead of his parents. Have you ever been in a parking lot and heard "er," and some little kid almost got run over because the people can't see him? There's a reason for this, and it always helps if you give the reasons. But in this thing, I'm for being reasonable because I'm a reasonable person, and I think God made us that way. But if every time a child obeys, he does it because it makes sense to him, then watch what's going on. He's not really practicing obedience in its fullest sense of the word. He's doing it because it makes sense to him. So I would give reasons to my children, and I would give reasons to any 3 to 6 year old for what I'm doing, but there would be times when I would say, "But the reason you obey me is because God says to honor and obey your parents." You follow me? I want them to embrace that admonition from God, that principle from God that says obedience. Obedience is what I want. Obedience is what I expect. And if you must punish, try removing privileges or using timeouts. When God says, "I set before you a blessing and a curse" in the Old Testament, what was the criteria for a blessing? A blessing if you obey, a curse if you disobey. What are the consequences of disobeying the speed limit?
Taking.
Here in Belton, the speed limit out here on this road, going by the campus, well, it was 35 miles per hour from the gym, this direction, But in Belton, it was 25 miles per hour. It used to be that way. You know how many students would be driving down that road going 35 in a 25 zone as soon as they got to Belton? And guess who was sitting in the Marine parking lot with their radar gun waiting for college students to come driving 35 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone? A Belton policeman. He would give them a ticket. You know what it would cost them when they would go down to Belton to pay the fine? $100. You understand that as consequences? And just understand, there's lots of things that, in terms of punishment, there are a lot of painful consequences that can follow misbehavior. If people have to be punished, and they will from time to time, then find something that's near and dear to them. And, well, for example, if you're going to be selfish, I mean, you've got 4 dolls, girl, and if you're not willing to share at least one of those dolls with your little sister, then guess what? I think I'll take all 4 dolls and send them off to hibernate in the closet. They're not fighting over it, she's just not sharing. So we'll put all 4 dolls in the closet, and you don't get to play with any of them for a while. They'll just go to sleep for the winter, and maybe next summer we'll pull them out and you can play with them again. Oh, well, then I'll share, Dad. But they're going to miss each other if they're not all in the bed together. Well, one of them's just going to have to be lonely. Send 2 of them to your sister to play with, because were any of you the little sister who just always bugging your big sister about wanting to play with her stuff? Why do you girls do that? Because you had plenty of dolls of your own, but for some reason, the younger wanted to play with her older sister's dolls. Now, see, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I don't understand that. But it isn't like she's being selfish, I don't think. It's just, you just want to play with the older sister's dolls. There's some kind of value there. But what does the Bible say about older sisters and sharing their dolls with their younger sisters? Does the Bible talk about sharing? So I'm thinking the principle, I don't understand why the little girl wants this, but the principle here is I want to teach the older one how to share. And if I don't teach the older one how to share, she'll probably grow up to be a very selfish person. So what about the younger one? Well, then I'll have to figure out a way to teach her how to share too. But if you have to punish them, take away something that's near and dear to them. And time out always helps, doesn't it? You can't play with your friends anymore. If you're supervising little children out on a playground somewhere, and some little kid is just running around thumping on people, you go, Johnny, Johnny. He goes, what? And he goes, what? I'm going, what are you doing? He said, I didn't do anything. When a little kid says, I didn't do anything, you probably figure out he did something. Can you figure out what he was doing? But I said, Johnny, come here. And he goes, what do you want, Mr. Bonine? And I'm going, just stand right here beside me. And I put my arm around his shoulder. And I say, let's just stand here and watch the way the kids are playing together. And see if we can learn something on how to be nice to other people. See, it could be he just hasn't been taught that yet. So I said, so look what people are doing. I said, is anybody running around thumping on people? No? I said, why not? He said, I don't know. I said, because the thumper is standing here beside me watching them. That's why. Now, my question is, if I let you go back out there and play, are you going to start thumping on people again? Or are you going to be nice? He goes, I'll be nice, Mr. Bonine. I said, and what will happen if you start thumping on people again? I'll have to come and stand by you. There you go, bud. You're on your way. Try to remember that. You understand? There's things you can. I don't need to get a paddle and give him a swat. I can help him learn how to be a responsible, kind, loving, caring person without just grabbing a paddle every time something happens. Okay, that's enough of that. Page 3. 8. Friends and play. You know what's one of the best skills you can give little children? Is how to be a friend to other people. When I hear some little kids say, I don't have any friends. When I hear an adult say, I don't have any friends. Do any of you have a Bible verse that pops in your mind when someone says, I don't have any friends? He who would have friends, I might be quoting from a translation you're not familiar with, should show himself friendly. Get your concordance. Look it up in the Bible. What the Bible says about friends. You want to have friends? Be a friend. See, now watch. Because I think, Karis, because of depravity that you've talked about before, we all want friends. Well, the number of friends you have will be directly related to how friendly you are to other people. The person who's friendly to a lot of people has plenty of friends. The person who sits around having a pity party, I meet adults at church. They walk in the door and say, well, I've come to this church 6 times and nobody has said a word to me. And I say, well, I don't think I've seen you before. Are you new here? Yes, this is my 6th time to be here, and you're the first person to speak to me. And I said, oh, I'm sorry about that. And then I said, have you said anything to the pastor about being a visitor? No. I was just waiting to see if someone's going to speak to me at this church. You understand? It's like, well, there's your problem right there. You're waiting for the world to stop and say, oh, here comes somebody who wants our attention. If you want to have friends, be friendly to others. And it talks about it. To become friends, children need, on page 308, children to be available to each other for play and other activities. So when someone says, let's go out and play, what's your answer going to be, whether you want to or not? If you want to cultivate friendships. Okay, let's go. Even when I came here to college, I had a roommate who, for some reason, thought playing tennis was cool. And he would say, Tom, you want to go play tennis? And what did I say growing up on a farm in Oklahoma? In my heart of hearts, what do you think I said about playing tennis? Tennis is just a dumb game. And I said, sure, Phil, let's go play tennis. And I'd go out there and hit that little ball back and forth over that net with him. And he'd say, wasn't that fun? Now, I'm not going to lie to him. I would say, you know what was fun? Is hanging out with you and having a good time and being a good friend. That was fun. It wouldn't matter whether we were playing tennis or doing something else. Just being with you was fun. He goes, you're a good friend, Tom. You understand that? It's just you do things with people that you do activities that they like to do. It's like, well, I don't like that. I don't want that. Why don't we ever do what I want to do? Well, I would say, when's the last time you did something you didn't want to do to be a friend to another person? Children become good friends when they spend a lot of time playing together. So, find time for them to spend. See, I had 2 daughters, so we didn't have any sons, and half of the human race is boys, and boys are just weird. Little boys, okay? So I wanted our little girls to have some time to interact with little boys. So I deliberately developed friendships with couples at church who had boys the same age as our girls. And we would go to their house with the intent of having some fellowship after church as adults, but my big ticket plan was for my girls to learn to play with guys. And they would come home saying, why are these boys always talking about, hey, I won, you lost? Well, I don't know, girls. It's just the way guys are. They're just weird. But I thought if they're ever going to develop friendships with guys down the road, they're going to have to spend some time playing with them and sharing things. And I think I told you earlier that one of the things I taught my girls was, when you go to school, always take extra pencils with you. So that if anyone needs a pencil, any of you have teachers that when you come to class, if you ask for a pencil, you're in trouble, you're supposed to come to class with a pencil in hand. Well, and there were always guys who didn't bring pencils to class. Most girls do, but even as a girl, I said, it doesn't matter who it is. Take extra pencils to school, and when one of your classmates doesn't have a pencil, say, here, I have an extra one. You can have one of mine. And just give it to them and let them keep it. And all of a sudden, does this surprise you? Everyone in the room considered my daughter their friend because she was just there sharing her pencils with them. Have kids share their toys. People come over and you take some of the things you have that other people like to have and share it with them. In fact, I even taught my children that if you have a friend over who loves something you have and they don't have it and you have two of them, what would you suggest I do if you really want to be friendly? Tell them they can take one of them home? One of my daughters says, Dad, I thought about doing that, but then I thought, no, because her little dolls, let's call them Sally and Mary. She said, if I gave her Sally, then Mary would be lonely, and if I gave her Mary, Sally would be lonely. I'm going, so maybe we should go buy another doll that you can just keep in a box, so the next time you have a friend over that doesn't have a doll, you can just give it, pull it out of the closet and give it to them. And as long as she hadn't played with it and given it a name and all of a sudden made it a part of her family, then that would work. I mean, just understand, just teach your kids how to give stuff away. I love going to thrift stores and buying bicycles for 50 cents. Yeah, that's what they sell them for. Now, sometimes they're broken, but then if I buy 3 bicycles for 50 cents, I can take the parts and build one good bicycle. So when little children come over and they ride a bicycle, that they come over to our house and they go, wow, I don't have a bicycle at my house. And I said, you like the one you're riding? And they go, yeah. And guess what I say to them? Well, take it home. I got a bunch of them out there behind the garage. Take it home. And by the way, if you buy 3 bicycles to make 2 good ones, or 1 good one, then that means you have 1 good bicycle and the frames for the other bicycles laying around, okay? So this stuff accumulates at my house. Well, Tim and Karen come home from Russia and they live with us, and both of them see my stack of bicycles behind the garage. Nobody can see it except me, so what does it bother anyone? But they go, Dad, can we get rid of all those old bicycles out there? And I'm going, sure, if it bothers you, I'll get rid of them. So I load all these old bicycles up on a trailer that I paid 50 cents a piece for. Okay, so that means I have 100 bicycles. That's why they said get rid of them. And I paid 50 cents a piece for them. That means I had $50 tied up in the bicycles. I put the 100 bicycles on a trailer. I took them over to Lee's Summit to the scrap metal place, and I sold them for $150. I came home and told my wife, I need to go buy some more bicycles. I mean, you buy it for 50 cents and you sell it for 75 cents or $1 at the scrap metal place. She said, no, Tom, no, that's not worth messing with. I go, okay. Plus it messes up the yard. So just teach people to give things away and play games with people and involve people in activity. Do all of you have tons of games for little kids to play? When I think of my daughters in the 3 to 6 year age, I have to tell you, I don't know why, but we had this game at our house. It was a cardboard game with little cups and little red cherries. It was called Hi-Ho Cherry-O. I don't even remember how we played it. All I remember is, my recollection is, it was the dumbest game in the world. But I played it all the time. Why? Because I'm developing warmth in a relationship with these 2 little girls. I did all kinds of things as a father to create that warm relationship. And if the kids see that, then later when they get older, they say, I don't like that game. I'm going, it's not the game that we're all about. It's doing what? It's being a friend. It's showing yourself friendly. That's how you develop friendships. Okay, I think that's enough of that one. Page 311 talks about social levels of play. This is kind of fun. You can observe this if you want to by working in the nursery at church or working with preschoolers at church. The book talks about how they'll sit alone to play, and then they'll watch other people playing, and then they'll play alongside some other people. Then they'll start to get involved in the other person's play, and then the highest level is cooperative play. So it takes time to get kids there, but our goal is to get them to cooperate. I mean, have any of you worked in little kids at church or daycare somewhere where here's a big box full of toys, and this little kid is picking toys out, taking them to the corner as if he's got a stash over there where he wants everything? Well, keep in mind, he probably doesn't have a lot of stuff at home, so he can become very possessive. I mean, think of reasons why he might be behaving that way, and then think, okay, what can I do for him? And I can say, you know what? If you'll just share all those toys in the corner with other people in the room, at the end of the day, I'll let you take a toy home. He goes, you will? I go, yeah. He said, any of these toys? I said, any of them. You pick one you want and take it home. I can always go buy another one. You'll be amazed. It's like, oh. Now, see, if he doesn't have toys at home, all of a sudden, you've done a huge thing for him. So he's willing to do some of the stuff you want to do. Now, one time I suggested that to some people working with little kids, and they go, that could get expensive. And you know what? I'll just tell you right up front. You know what I've concluded? Being the best caregiver in the world is going to be expensive. I mean, when everybody gets together at our house for a family get-together, if I want the kids to be able to play basketball, football, soccer, and tennis. I mean, one time my grandsons wanted to play tennis. And I'm going, okay, let's get the tennis rackets and the tennis balls and let's go up to the public tennis courts in Raymore. We went up there and they were all occupied by other people. And the boys couldn't play tennis. And I thought, man, what a bummer. So I said, well, we'll solve that problem. Any idea what I did? I went out and bought a tennis net and some poles to put it up over the driveway. We have a big wide driveway, and made the driveway our tennis court. So when they wanted to play tennis, now I'll grant you that I paid quite a bit of money for that first tennis net, but then after that I started watching for them at the thrift store. Now I have 2 or 3 backups. I have volleyball nets. I mean, you understand? If you want kids to engage in healthy play activities, you have to spend some money to have the stuff available for them to do that. And most of the sports equipment I buy at thrift stores. I mean, I had a little kid come over one time, and he said, I'm left-handed. Do you have any left-handed baseball gloves? And I thought, they're all left-handed. Now, what does he mean? He wants a right-handed baseball glove so he can throw with his left hand. I'm going, I don't have one of those. Well, the next time you come over, I will have one, because I'll go to the thrift store until I find one. And then pick one up for $1, $1.50, and then take it home and put it in my container that has baseball equipment in it. And the next time the little guy comes over and he goes, did you find a baseball glove for a right hand? I said, sure enough, there's one out there. All right, he says. Why is he so excited about this? Because I'm spending money to help this little guy have a fun time in cooperative play. And I think it's just so healthy to do that. On page 314, so understand, if you're going to promote cooperative play with children, you're going to have to spend some money. Now, sometimes they'll just want to play on their own. I was looking through some old photographs the other day, and my 2 oldest grandsons wanted a fort. So I went all out. I went up to the lumber yard And you know these panels you can buy, I think they're 8 feet wide or something and 6 feet tall, that I bought some of that fencing paneling. Well, 1, 2, 3, I bought 4 of them. And then made a fort for them. And then we took a little place and cut a hole in it so they could get in and out. Okay, that was pretty costly. But understand, I had 2 daughters, and my daughters never wanted a fort, and I have 2 grandsons, and they want a fort, and I'm thinking, Poppy could build you a fort. So you understand why I'm kind of a popular Poppy with my grandchildren, because I do stuff like that. And so then they built a fort. Well, I have a picture that I just was looking at recently, and I said, Nina, come and look at this. And here were these 2 boys out in their fort, and I have some little grandchildren who were much smaller than they were, so that little ones that didn't have a fort, and the older boys were being kind of selfish with their fort. So these little kids built their own fort out of just wood that I had laying around, and it was like they stacked up some limbs and stuff and put some boards on top, and I threw some tarp over it. So they made a fort that looked kind of like a wood pile with a tarp over it, but they got inside and had a little place, and they thought that was so cool to have their own little fort. In fact, the older boys thought their fort was so cool, they wanted to get inside theirs. And I said, only if you let the little ones inside yours. So they reciprocated, because I wanted to teach them how to play with each other. So sometimes you can have these kids playing without spending a lot of money. But generally, if you're going to promote active, cooperative playing with children, it's going to cost you something. Page, oh, that's it. Chapter 10. Ages 7 to 11. Chapters 10, 11, and 12. Chapter 10 is their physical development. 11 is their cognitive development. And 12 is their social, emotional, and spiritual development. Page 328 says, at the age of 9, the average girl is the same height and weight as the average boy. 2 years later, at the age of 11, the average girl is 1.5 inches taller and 8 pounds heavier than the boys. So what happens at the age of 9 if a boy starts being mean to girls? What happens 2 years later? Did this happen to any of you guys? You go thumping on the girls when you were 8 or 9 years old? And now at the age of 11, they're bigger, stronger, and payback time arrives. Girls, be careful. I say to the 11-year-old girls, because what's going to happen in 4 more years when you're 15 and 16? The boys are going to get bigger and stronger and come back thumping on you again. No, not so much. Because when they get to that age, they're now in adolescence, and they see girls differently than they did at the ages of 9 and 11. But this is so funny to me, especially a 13 or 14-year-old boy who takes an interest in a girl. If he likes a guy, if a guy likes another guy, he'll often come up and thump him on the arm, bump him or something. Hey guy, how's it going? So he wants to be friendly to a girl. Did any of you ever have a guy do that to you? So the guy wants to be friendly to a girl. He comes up, hey, how's it going? She goes, what? What are you doing hitting me like that? Well, I'm just being friendly. That's when you say to the guys, that's not what girls call friendliness. I mean, you have to take another approach with the girls if you're going to develop a friendship with them. And the reason I wanted my daughters, again, at church to make friends with people with boys is how are they going to learn to relate to boys when they start to grow up if they haven't related to them when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Now, I will tell you this, that this one family we got to be friends with, and our daughters learned how to relate to this boy they'd go to his house and play boy games, they called it, with him. But he had so much fun, and they thought it was funny how competitive he was and all that kind of thing. So then when they got to be young adolescents in their early teens, they would go to school and talk about playing pool with Aaron. I'll call him Aaron. Playing pool with Aaron over at his house after church on Sunday night. Okay, any of you know what happens when a girl goes to school and tells other girls that she was playing pool with Aaron after church on Sunday night? Why do girls do this? They go, Karen has a boyfriend, Karen has a boyfriend. Like, and she said, Dad, why do they do that? And I said, because they're not very smart. That's why they do that. They probably don't understand how to have a friendship with a boy. Just don't worry about it. Write them off. But why do girls do that? You understand where there's all this stuff we need to teach children about how to be kind. And especially from this 7 to 11-year-old, there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to be taught to boys and girls about how to be sensitive and caring and understanding to the other half of the human race. Okay, we'll talk about this some more on Monday. Yeah.